Due Process, winner of 25 regional Emmy Awards, including the 2014 New York Emmys for our coverage of criminal justice and current affairs. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers School of Law, Newark, and the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Studio facilities provided by the Rutgers ITV Studio, Division of Continuing Studies.
7.5% of all of the births in this country are illegal immigrants, okay? You can't afford it.
Except that according to the Constitution, no child born in this country is illegal. They are all U.S. citizens. But Trump's claim that they should be stripped of citizenship, even deported, has found some traction in the Republican field. Could birthright be successfully challenged? And at what cost? On this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy. Additional funding from the New Jersey State Bar Foundation and the PSEG Foundation, making things better in our communities.
What to do about undocumented immigrants? It's been a source of debate for decades, but the children of the undocumented have largely been held harmless. Stripping them of their citizenship, never seriously proposed in American presidential politics until now. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King. The change in 2 words, Donald Trump, who wants the citizen children to not only lose their legal status, but to be deported too. The consequences would be enormous in America's world image and public disruption, public dollars, and in the lives of 4.5 million U.S. citizens.
It's not just the birth certificate and the social security number. It's a door wide open for opportunities to be successful, to go to school, financial aid. Everything comes with birthright citizenship.
It's a fact. You're born on U.S. soil, you are an American, whether your parents are here legally or not.
That's a constitutional right.
A right accepted as common law since the founding, but enshrined in the Constitution after the Civil War with the ratification of the 14th Amendment.
It's inherited. It's in our Constitution. We always believe that everybody who is born here is a United States citizen.
But could that constitutional guarantee be challenged?
As a policy matter, Megan, it doesn't make any sense anymore that people who are here illegally, that their children would have automatic citizenship.
And could a challenge be successful?
The 14th Amendment, I was right on it. You can do something with it, and you can do something fast. You can do something fast.
But what's brought cheers in some quarters is being met with anger and fear in others.
If they revoke my citizenship, which I don't even know why they will, where would I go to?
Back to Cameroon, his mother, an undocumented immigrant, left there 24 years ago.
I came here for better life because they say America is the land of freedom.
As Pope Francis reminded Congress,
most of us were once foreigners.
But Chima was born in Newark.
Yes, America is home.
He graduated from Cornell this year. He's headed for med school. And he can't understand why Donald Trump would want him to be deported.
The woman has a baby on our land in the United States. Now we have to take care of that baby for 85 years. That baby becomes a citizen.
I don't expect somebody to hand me something for free. I teach my children the same way. I'm just saying to the politician to check well before they take a decision.
But in the Republican presidential field, Trump's not been alone in his attacks on birthright.
It serves as an incentive, encouraging people to break the law and come here illegally, and we ought to change that policy.
Not just Ted Cruz, but Ben Carson, Rand Paul, Rick Santorum, Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal. They have all endorsed, or at least flirted with, the anti-birthright bandwagon.
Well, I hate to say it, but Donald Trump has a bit of a point here.
And what about Chris Christie? Despite attempts to distance himself,
Yeah, well, we're not kicking out American citizens.
Fox anchor Megyn Kelly put him on the spot.
Now, let me ask you this, because earlier this month you apparently suggested to Laura Ingraham that the 14th Amendment and this birthright citizenship thing was outdated and needed to be re-examined in light of the current circumstances.
Yeah, what I said was I'm willing, when we do overall immigration reform, I'm willing to put anything on the table for discussion with all the different advocates.
And it's not just Republicans. Don Crescitello, a Democrat, is the former mayor of Morristown.
Maybe this issue needs to go to the Supreme Court. I would like the court to rule that people who enter the country in an illegitimate way and have a child here, that the child should not be a citizen.
You know, if we're gonna talk about birthright citizenship, and then, you know, we're really talking about huge devastating impact on immigrant communities and on citizen communities alike.
And Grismeldy Gonzalez, now a nursing student and new mother, knows both of those communities firsthand.
I was born here in New Brunswick to undocumented parents.
With all the disadvantage of her family's second-class status. And though she and her sister were citizens, when it came time for college, state financial aid was denied.
Based on the legal status of our parents, although we were lawful residents of New Jersey.
It took a court case and several appeals to finally get her here to nursing school at Rutgers.
It was absurd, really.
And despite Trump's threat of mass deportations of undocumented parents and their citizen children, she sees his plan as impractical and immoral.
It's definitely an ethical issue. It's not just a political issue. It's a fundamental law that makes America what it is, a land of opportunity and liberty.
I say this to you as the son of immigrants, knowing that so many of you are also descendants from immigrants.
And the Pope wasn't talking just to America, but we can assume to Europe and its refugee influx, and to much of the rest of the world. Because one thing Donald Trump does have right is that this country is nearly alone among the world's developed nations when it comes to granting birthright.
An interesting place to begin the conversation with Assemblyman Michael Patrick Carroll, a lawyer who's been called New Jersey's most conservative legislator. Chen, Dean of Rutgers Law School, a member of the ACLU National Board, and an executive producer of Due Process, and Amy Gottlieb, Associate Regional Director for the Immigrant Rights Program of the American Friends Service Committee. Welcome to all of you. Assemblyman Carroll, I'm going to start with you, an old friend of Due Process. First of all, I got to admit, I'm not unbiased on this. I regard the wartime amendments as the core of the American secular faith. So it's hard for me to contemplate. So I want to quote Sandy. One of her favorite guys is John McEnroe, who says, "You cannot be serious." Are you about the possibility of either changing the Constitution or finding a way to rework our interpretation of the 14th Amendment?
Well, of course, we know that the Constitution doesn't actually mean what it says. It can grow and evolve. It's a living, breathing document which, evolving notions
Aren't
of
you
society.
An imposter?
Absolutely.
The Assemblyman I know is a strict, what do you call it?
We don't, there's no strict. There's just simply read the document. See, that's why I don't think that the Constitution can be read in any other way. That it says what it says. And you know, it would be nice if every justice in every case always did exactly what the document in front of him or her said. Unfortunately, they don't. That said, I think the document, remember, our Civil War amendments were adopted at the time when the definition of an American was a person who was here. And you walked off the boat or the train or whatever else you want, and you were an American. That's no longer the case.
But we were extending it to a class of persons who had been denied citizenship up to that point.
That's the point, is that at the time there was no such thing as a legal or illegal immigrant. They were just, if you came here, you were illegal. And that was it. That's changed. And I think that we froze in the law a particular standard, a status that does not work by modern standards. And I think many other countries that were once common law jurisdictions and had this, I may be wrong about this, but I think Australia is one of them, abolished birthright citizenship.
Australia is one, Britain is another.
Canada still retains it, as I recollect.
Much of Europe, Canada still does.
But much of Europe was not common law jurisdictions.
But, right, but they did revoke birthright citizenship. We, however, have accepted this as a part of American exceptionalism, if you will. Ron, answer your friend.
Well, on this one occasion, I'm very glad to agree with my good friend and classmate, Assemblyman Carroll. The 14th Amendment means what it says. And on this one, I will be happy to channel Justice Scalia with enthusiasm. Any person born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen. And despite some attempts I have seen, and very, very, I think, extended, in my view, convoluted arguments, that subject to jurisdiction means something like your parents owed allegiance to the United States.
That's what's being said by, including some law professors?
A very few, and even those law professors who say it acknowledge they're in the very, very distinct minority. The only two situations in which anyone's been able to describe a situation in which you're born in the U.S. but not subject to the jurisdiction is if you're the child of a diplomat because you have diplomatic immunity and therefore are not subject to the laws of the United States, or arguably if you're the child of a soldier of an invading army that has occupied the United States, which situation, of course, has not happened. But except for those two possibilities, if you're born here, the immigration status of your parents is irrelevant to whether you're subject to the jurisdiction of it. Indeed, obviously, those who are for greater immigration reform would take the position that those who are born here, including undocumented immigrants, or the parents of undocumented immigrant parents, are obviously subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Otherwise, we couldn't enforce laws against them.
Amy, is this idea a contribution to our discourse about law and policy? And I recognize you as a person who, perhaps unlike the rest of us, is open to new ideas that didn't come from your own mind. But is this a good contribution to our discourse about the complicated questions of immigration, law, and policy?
Thanks for that question. Honestly, no, it's not. As I see it, it takes us away from the fundamental conversation that we've been having for many years now in the U.S. about what we have created in terms of a huge number of undocumented immigrants living in this country because our immigration laws don't provide a path to legalization or citizenship for that community. We don't talk about the fact that migration is a global phenomenon driven by many factors that will not change based on what we do here in the United States. Those factors will change as conditions change in sending countries, if that's at all possible. So this conversation about whether children of undocumented immigrants should be U.S. citizens or not really takes us sort of down another path that creates hysteria and fear and doesn't recognize that by the current state of affairs where we have this large number of undocumented immigrants without access to status and the exploitation they suffer, the fear that they suffer, the consequences that undocumented status has on the broader community. Excluding Assemblyman
Carroll, and I mean this sincerely, do you see the specter of race underlying this discourse?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
of racial prejudice as a drive. Which race? Yes. I would say all people of color.
Hispanic is not a race. So, so when we talk about racism, that's not a race. And so let's use the language carefully. I think we can. We discussed the Constitution a minute ago with the specific language. Hispanic is not a race. They're whites or
many
Native
Latinos
or
are people of color. And so the question again, and much of the discourse is not at least framed in terms of West Europeans who come here, and we may have increasing numbers of East Europeans at various times, and we have in the past, but in terms of people of color, who are the immigrant class who's being discussed right now. So the question was, and I would direct it to you as well, as sharp as you are, it's hard for me to believe that you don't detect, at least in this discourse, the specter of people afraid of the other, driving what has not hitherto been a widely discussed remedy, which is the birthright.
There may be. I mean, again, you'd be a fool not to admit that there's always a discussion when you have groupthink involved that one group will be allied against another. That's of course. But hopefully we'll have an intellectual discussion on the subject and decide whether it actually is good policy. And again, it's not a session, again, it's not to deal with
Let
this.
me ask you a policy question.
Sure.
And normally, it's hard to get legislators even talk about the other branch of their own government. But let's assume that there's a discussion about having Congress shape legislation that would directly raise the question of how the 14th Amendment should be interpreted as to undocumented, children of undocumented persons. Do you think that the House and the Senate, the U.S. House and Senate, would likely pass such a measure in their current configuration, so that it might be such a challenge?
Not without a filibuster, and I don't, unless you get, again, the Democrats have a vested interest in bringing as many undocumented immigrants into their party as possible, so I don't see that happening.
So if you couldn't do it that way, then the other option is amending the 14th Amendment.
Which isn't going to happen either.
Which is even less
So again,
likely,
we're talking
right?
philosophically here as to whether it is a good idea, not whether it's going to actually pass.
Why is it a good idea? Why is it a good idea? Why is it a bad idea?
But I'm sorry, that's spontaneously. Why is it a bad idea?
Because it's not a bad idea. It's a good idea. The idea is to say to people, first of all, again, I think that Trump on this one may be right, that you provide an incentive for people to come here and bear children here. More so, though, I think it's ultimately a thing that if America is going to have immigration laws, if it's going to have laws which define who an American is, then those laws ought to say and apply to everybody. That is to say, if you're here legally, great, welcome, fantastic. But if you're not here legally, then you belong back in your country, and your kids belong with you.
Okay, let me now go to what that would mean. According to the American Action Forum, not a bastion of liberal thinking, the estimated cost of deporting, and they're just looking at 11.2 rather than 16, 17, whatever it is, with the children, to deport 11.2 million immigrants would cost $400 to $600 billion and take 20 years. Any way that could possibly happen? Any way that could possibly be done?
Is this directed at me or
Both. Either.
That would be easier for me to answer. Obviously, I would think not, and that probably doesn't even take into account the cost of the disruption that we would cause by taking those people, some of them have been members of the community for years, decades, ripping them out of the community and deporting them, and the economic cost that would ensue from that. So I think it's just it makes for interesting rhetoric, but it's a practical matter.
This is an issue that is more ethical than it is political or legal. Why has the body politic been willing to focus so much attention on it? Why are we discussing it? I don't mean we at this table, but why is the national polity talking about this issue if it's not realistically, legally, or politically, but rather an ethical, cultural question?
Well, I suppose I should leave the nature of political rhetoric to my classmate.
You're abandoning the field?
I'm just a simple country lawyer from Union County. But it seems to me that it is because they may be safe in the knowledge that we know both legally and practically it's not going to happen. Yet, nevertheless, it makes for robust discussion in campaign debates.
And coming back to the figures, of course, I will always debate numbers with you. I think it's during the last economic slowdown, about 1.5 million people went back to their countries voluntarily because they couldn't find jobs here anymore. E-Verify would solve a lot of these problems because if you can't find work, you're going to go home. But I think it's interesting as a policy matter, for example. We find people saying, well, wages in this country are too low. Well, it's not a surprise because you have huge numbers of relatively unskilled immigrants competing for a very small number of jobs. So on virtually every level, the people...
Jobs in many cases that Americans don't want.
Oh, yeah, well, they'll always...
Especially at what the immigrants are paid.
Bingo. There's always a market for a job or people who do a job if the wages go up, which is what will happen if people who are willing to do them for substantially less than Americans are willing to do them for leave. So it's on every single level. The idea of a whole group of people coming here illegally is a bad idea. Remember, we supposedly solved this in 1986. Remember, Ronald Reagan got up there and dealt with the Democrats, and they came to an agreement and said, this one time and no more. Well, that's what they should say. And what happens if we do it again? Where's the no more?
Amy's been trying to get in.
Question, why are we so comfortable focusing on the truly innocent? That is, the one person who's innocent in the entire equation is the child of two people, even if they're undocumented. Why are we willing to do that which most Americans regard as a serious sanction, expel them from the American experience? Why are we comfortable even having that discussion?
Honestly, I don't think people are thinking about the legality or the politics of it. I think it's a very easy way to fuel anti-immigrant flames. And we're good at that in this country. And we've seen it over and over again. We see immigrants scapegoated for a whole host of ills that often have nothing to do with a person's immigration status. And so it's a way in our messaging and our communication to say, we need to focus on this horrible issue that, you know, immigrants are coming here and they're having babies and their babies are citizens and they're taking our welfare, whatever the arguments might be. And I hate that I just repeated that, but that is one of the arguments. In fact, you know, the contributions of immigrant communities are immeasurable. The revival of many of our towns and cities due to new immigrants coming in and building their shops, their communities, their name. Sure, undocumented and documented, both. But in particular, you know, you see the young children of people who come in without status who have shown themselves to be extraordinarily successful. You know, you have people profiled on your program, you know, graduating from Cornell University, you know, shining.
And afraid, by the way, that this could happen.
Afraid that this could happen, and also, you know, doubly afraid about, you know, what happens to their parents as well. There's a real protective sense of, you know, U.S. citizen kids who have undocumented parents. What's going to happen to my parents? You know, trying to do anything they can to help their parents get status. So I don't deny that we do have a big mess that we have created, and there are things that we can do to fix that mess that actually include protecting the rights and dignity of all human beings, of ensuring that people have access to status, ensuring that people have access to due process when there is a potential deportation, that the immigration courts be funded. You know, the immigration court backlogs now are so ridiculous that a person who's awaiting an immigration court hearing might not have a hearing until 2019.
But let's get back to the children of the undocumented. And Michael, since you are outnumbered here, let me come back to you.
4 to 1 is easy odds.
Would you like mass deportations, or would you just like to undo birthright?
Again, well, the fact is I want to be clear that the kind of the argument I just heard is open borders, because there's no alternative to that. I mean, if you basically said if you come here illegally, welcome. That's open borders. And
okay, but we're talking about the children.
Let's talk about children now for a second. Okay, because the simple fact of the matter is you should be with your parents. And when your parents go back to wherever they're from, you should go with them. And if 10, 15, 20 years down the line.
And if your parents don't go back, are you a citizen or are you undocumented?
Well, again, right now, you're a citizen. Again, we've
no,
resolved that.
In Michael Patrick Carroll's
Oh, in my way, if I could wave my legal magic wand, everybody would be would have to be the child of a legal person here to be a legal citizen.
So then, don't you add to the undocumented underclass by 5 or more million people?
Maybe, but again, the answer to the question is go home. And that should be the default setting on all these discussions. If you're here illegally, go home and take your kids with you. It's not unreasonable to insist that people obey the law.
The Assemblyman has effectively busted us for bias. But let me ask Dean this one question. What about commercial operations that bring people here for sizable amounts of money exclusively to have a child? Does that trouble you at all in terms of the broader discourse?
And we know that this is happening, Taiwan particularly. There are agencies set up just for doing this.
They tend not to be illegal, though. They tend to be here on visas.
No, they come legally.
Yes.
Yes, but they are not residents and they are not citizens.
Disclosing that their primary purpose is
and they're
to
not
citizenship for the
disclosing.
child. So
Let me say this. I think a lot of the opposition that has been fomented to birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment has been caused by opposition to what I think is the myth of the so-called anchor baby, which really, I think upon actual examination, is a problem that really doesn't exist. Throughout all this time, I mean, recently there have been suggestions that parents of citizens who don't have regular status themselves can regularize it. But up until all this, the immigration law up until the current time has usually provided that a child citizen cannot sponsor a relative coming to the country until the age 21. So having a baby and then waiting 21 years is not a really effective way to get citizenship.
And on that note, with our thanks to Chen, Amy Gottlieb, and Michael Patrick Carroll, that is it for this edition of Due Process, but we will be back next week and every week with more on the issues of law and justice that impact our lives.
And if you want more due process, visit our Facebook page or stop by our website at dueprocesstv.rutgers.edu, where you'll find our entire archive for viewing on demand. For Sandy, producer Tanya Bentley, and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
I see the United States as my home, especially New Brunswick, since I've been born and raised here my whole life. Everything comes with citizenship. It's not just the birth certificate and the social security number. It's a door wide open for opportunities to be successful, to go to school, financial aid. Everything comes with birthright citizenship. And it's really a right for the child, although people like to argue that it's rewarding the parent. But it's really, they have to think of the child and the parent as two different entities. And they have to think about the child and their future in this country.
Want even more insight on law and justice? Become a fan of Due Process on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter and watch us on demand on YouTube.